In 1981, the Ford Escort was launched as Ford's world car and with almost immediate success, and through the 80s was one of the top-selling cars in the US. After successful revisions and redesigns, Ford unceremoniously replaced it with the Focus, ending an era that actually started all the way back in 1955. Alright, so welcome back to All Cars Y'all. If you're new here, my name is John, and this is a far too brief history of the Ford Escort, specifically here in North America. Ford had first used the Escort name in the UK for a version of the Anglia and Squire line as the lower trim level from 1955 through 1961. For 1968, the Escort debuted as the replacement for the Anglia and went on to be the best seller in Western Europe, but especially in the UK, as well as a successful platform for rally racing. It was a conventional and not technically innovative design with front engines and rear-wheel drive, McPherson struts up front, and a live axle at the rear. This first generation lasted until 1974, by which time it had sold 2 million units and became the first Ford model outside of the United States to do so. Then in January 75, a second generation Escort was released in Europe, keeping the rear-wheel drive layout and much of the structure and mechanicals, and was once again a sales and rallying success until sales ended in 1980. Before the second generation had been launched, work on its replacement, codenamed Erica, had begun with Ford's new CVH engine program. This compound valve hemispherical engine, which means yes, it's a Hemi, was overhead cam designed with a crown on the pistons intended to create turbulence and produce increased fuel economy and reduce emissions. For the car, referred to as the Mark III, it was a completely new design, with front-wheel drive, a lighter hatchback body, and fully independent suspension, all intended to compete directly with their benchmarks of the VW Golf and the Honda Civic, and to consolidate the European models of the Capri and Fiesta with the US market, where it was intended to replace the Pinto as well as the imported Fiesta in their lineup. The idea of a world car at the time was to create one car that would be built for every market at factories around the world, but like many, quote, world cars of the time, such as the Chrysler and Plymouth Horizon, thinking diverged during development and the models became substantially different. So much so that while many designs such as the suspension are similar, they share no components, and only the CVH engine and the ATX automatic transmission were shared between the European and US models, and no body panels were interchangeable. The car was a major engineering change from the previous models, with the Escort now being front-wheel drive, a new stiffer and hatchback body, fully independent suspension all around, lighter by about 150 pounds, and of course that CVH engine. The US version was launched as a 1981 model along with a Mercury version called the Lynx, and Ford leaned heavily into the world car designation in print ads and commercials, as well as the first model having a globe badge on the car. With 4 trim lines of L, GL, GLX, and SS, it was offered in a 3-door hatchback and a 5-door station wagon, with a 5-door hatch coming later in the year. The European market also got a 3-door station wagon, a 2-door convertible, and a 2-door van variant, as well as a 4-door sedan named the Orion. But from here on out, we'll focus on the US models. The engine was a 1.6-liter making 65 horsepower and offered with either a 4 or 5-speed manual transmission or the new 3-speed auto. For 82, the engine horsepower was up to 69, and a high-output version making 80 horsepower, and in 83, the HO got multi-port fuel injection, bumping power up to 88. In 84, 2 other engines were offered, a turbocharged version of the 1.6 making 120 horsepower, and a Mazda 2-liter diesel with 52 horsepower and rated up to 66 miles per gallon on the highway. Just 1 year in, the car got a mild facelift, the world emblem was removed, and the SS package was dropped as General Motors had an SS package already, and it was replaced with the new GT model. By 82, the Escort was the best-selling nameplate in the US, and it went on to be the top-selling car 3 times during the 80s. That first year SS package was either a 3-door or a 5-door wagon with blacked out trim, stripes and decals, upgraded brakes and suspension, and full instruments, but with the same basic Escort powertrain. In '82, the SS name was dropped and the GT replaced it, now only as a 3-door and with the new HO engine, again with upgraded brakes, fog lights, and spoilers. In '83, it got a fuel-injected engine with 88 horsepower and later the turbo motor. The EXP was introduced for 1982 based on the Escort but redesigned into a 2-door coupe. While sporty looking, it was actually about 200 pounds heavier than the Escort but with the same engine, so for a country coming out of energy crisis and a recession, it was positioned as a stylish fuel economy leader. Mercury received its own version named the LN7 and it only lasted for 1 year. More expensive than the Escort, the EXP came well equipped for its time, and Ford almost immediately began upgrading the equipment, including a new 4.05-to-1 final drive, close ratio 4-speed, upgraded brakes, and later in '82, the 80 horsepower HO engine. For '84, the GLX trim was eliminated and became the LX model, with the new fuel-injected GT engine and styling treatment and an updated dash. Also in '84, the 120 horsepower turbo engine was dropped into the EXP with 120 foot-pounds of torque and shaving nearly 5 seconds off the 0 to 60 time, all the way down to 9 seconds. However, the Turbo GT Escort was ended shortly after in '85 as it had been a poor seller. As an 85.5 model, the second generation was heavily revised and largely the same body with an extensively revised nose. The 1.6-liter engine was eliminated and a new 1.9-liter version fitted in, making 86 horsepower with a 2-barrel carburetor or 108 horsepower with fuel injection in the GT model. Stylistically, the car was more aerodynamic and chrome trim was reduced, and in '86 a new pony trim became the lowest priced offering, replacing the L, and a Mazda diesel continued in some models until after '87. For '87, the lineup was again simplified to 3 trims, Pony, GL, and GT, with the Pony and GT being only 3 doors and the GL is a 3-door, 5-door, or a wagon. This year, the Lynx was canceled and replaced with the Mercury Tracer based on the Ford Laser, itself derived from a Mazda platform. The carbureted versions were replaced with throttle body injection, bringing the base engine up to 90 horsepower and the GT up to 110. In mid-'88, the car was again facelifted, revising the front and rear and moving to plastic bumpers, and at this time also canceling the EXP, and with the LX trim replacing the GL. In 1990, as a '91 model, the second-generation Escort debuted, dramatically revised and adding a 4-door sedan in '92. While once again a, quote, world car, it was now based on the Mazda 323 like the Mercury Tracer before. Ford kept the 1.9-liter CVH engine, now with sequential fuel injection and electronic distributorless ignition good for 88 horsepower, for the Pony and the LX trims, while the GT and a new LXE line got a Mazda-built 16-valve 1.8-liter dual overhead cam engine, making 127 horsepower, and with a sportier setup including suspension improvements, 4-wheel disc brakes, sports steering wheel and bucket seats, and continuing an asymmetrical grille theme on the GT. This new engine in the GT dropped 0 to 60 times down to about 8.3 seconds, and that previous 4-speed manual and 3-speed autos were both dropped, and the car now came with a standard 5-speed or a 4-speed auto option. And over the next few years, wheel sizes increased, airbags were added, the dash was redesigned, and in '96, it was the last year for this generation. The third generation launched in '96 as a '97 model, once again based on a Mazda platform shared with the Protege. Much more aerodynamically styled and bringing it in the style family with the Contour and the Taurus, it came only as a 4-door sedan or a wagon variant, as the hatchback and 2-door were abandoned. The body was stiffened by 25%, and while the wheelbase remained the same at 98.4 inches, its length grew by almost 4 inches overall. The only engine was a heavily revised 2.0-liter version of the CVH with a single overhead cam and split-port induction, making 110 horsepower, and either a base or an LX trim. For 98, the trims were revised to LX as the base and SE replacing the LX, but more option packages became available, and the 2.0-liter ZTEC dual overhead cam engine became available, making 130 horsepower and 127 pound-feet of torque, but only for their new ZX2 car. They also offered a sport option with distinct wheels, tachometer, and a spoiler. The Escort wagon and the Mercury were canceled after 99. With the cancellation of the Probe after 97, Ford sought to fill in the smaller, sporty coupe missing from the lineup with a new version of the Escort, the rakishly styled Escort ZX2. While also replacing the GT in the lineup and focusing on younger buyers, the 98 Escort ZX2 came with a 130 horsepower 2-liter engine standard, while in 99 and in 2000, a limited production higher performance version called the ZX2 SR used a 143 horsepower version of the ZTEC intended to compete against the Civic Si and the Dodge Neon ACR. Even though by 99 Ford continued to sell over 250,000 Escorts a year, it was canceled in 2000, although sales did continue to rental or fleet companies until 2002. The ZX2 lasted in 2004 as well, but had lost its Escort name. The Focus was launched in 2000, being sold concurrently with the Escort, and with the ZX3 eventually taking the place of the ZX2 in the marketplace. But that wasn't the end of the Escort name. In China, Ford took the second-generation Focus platform, the C1, and launched it as an Escort in 2014. The Escort was another example of U.S. manufacturers in the 70s trying to create a world car like the Beetle or the Golf. That is, one car made around the world, meant to be a fit for everyone. Well, of course, it didn't really work out that way. While a strong seller and much improved over its initial lifespan, the Escort here in the US wasn't objectively very good initially, at least compared to the imports, but it was still a top seller. Complaints around the engine, some funky handling, some wide gear spacing, and reliability plagued the early car, and by the time they were all largely worked out, generations of imports had passed them by. I've had the pleasure of driving some of every generation of Escort, but I had extensive experience with the 80s version, and that left me honestly with a positive opinion of them. I think part of their appeal was they offered a good transition to those who were familiar with the traditional large cars and were comforted by a smaller platform. Good space inside, and the car had a sense of being kind of heavy and a relatively good ride. It made them a good transition for many families. The later ones, built on a Mazda platform, were competitive with anything else that was out there in the marketplace. But after decades of being a bestseller at various times in almost every market in the world, I still can't find an answer to why Ford dropped the Escort name. I have my suspicion, and it was to bring their smallest car, their smaller car, into alignment with their corporate naming conventions. The letter E is used for their SUVs, like the Escape, the Edge, the Explorer, the Expedition, and the letter F is used for their cars, like the Fiesta, the Focus, the Fusion, or the 500. I truly believe Ford squandered decades of good name recognition worldwide in order to replace Escort with Focus, simply to keep all of their cars using the same naming trends. I would love to have a conversation with the MBA that came up with that stupid idea. But thanks so much for watching, and I want to give an extra special thanks to my Patreons whose support help make this channel viable. If you support independent news, opinions, histories like this, and sometimes rants, consider supporting the channel. Thank you so much for being here. So welcome back to All Cars Y'all. Welcome back to All Cars Y'all. If you're new here, I am John, and this is a far too brief history of the Ford Focus, specifically here. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. If you're new here, my name is John, and this is a far too brief history of the Ford Focus in North America. So welcome back to All Cars, y'all. If you're new here, God.